Welcome to week 4 of our series, Good News. This week we dive into Romans 5, and there's good news for everyone. God's not mad, and He made peace. We get to live in relationship with Him because of all He has done. Let's lean in. I just want to pause and acknowledge everyone who was brave and bold and vulnerable enough to say, I need help. Listen, that's probably the first identifier of somebody who wants to follow Jesus, is us recognizing and realizing we need more than what we brought, and we just need help. And so, and it's good for us to stand next to each other, to look around the room and say, oh man, I want to stand with them, I'll hold them up. And so let's continue to do that, because the truth is, there's a lot of news in our world that's just not that good. Right? There's a lot of stuff that comes into our world, either by the actions of others, by the brokenness of the world around us, and sometimes, if we're honest, by our own mistakes, our own poor choices, or our own decisions. As good as intentioned as they may have been, there's stuff that finds its way into us that's just in the category of not awesome. We find ourselves in the midst of this pretty regularly. In fact, if you look around our culture, our world, if you just scroll through the news feed just a little bit, you find bad news on top of bad news on top of bad news, right? And even if the feed is trying to fill you with all the right stuff, somehow something went massively wrong in big data this week, because I saw a whole section on cats in my news feed. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what happened. So there was some little blip in the text sphere. But listen, when you scroll, what you find constantly is just challenges, things to be worried about, things to be concerned about, big questions about how things are going to turn out, who has the answers, and the people who have bad answers are getting their way, look out for them, and the people who are this, and man, it just creates this anxiety. Are you experiencing people around you just kind of on edge? Is anybody, like, as you look around the people, you walk into your coffee shop, you walk into your work, you walk into your home, everywhere you go, everybody's just like right on the edge. Anybody with me? Listen, people are cranky right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, we came close to seeing a fist fight over blueberries and Sprouts recently. Something has come off the rails if blueberries at Sprouts is what leads to someone coming over the counter. You know what I'm saying? There's this anxiety, there's this angst that has been building in people. And when you live constantly surrounded by bad news or challenging news, it's not a surprise that we find our way into that. But what we know is this. While the world is full of mostly bad news, it feels like it, there's good news, don't get me wrong. The problem is it's just for a few people and it's only for a little while. What we really need is good news that's for everybody and for always, and this is the kind of news we're finding in Jesus. We've been saying it week after week. We've been looking into this letter that a guy named Paul wrote to a church, a group of followers of Jesus in Rome in the first century. In fact, if you have your Bible, I want to encourage you to grab it. It can be in Romans 5 here in just a minute. This letter that Paul writes is saying, listen, Jesus did something life and history altering, and it has everything to do with all of us. And so what we're doing is we're just kind of piecing out one bit at a time, putting together all the good news that we find in here. Because this good news is not just first century good news. It was not just good news written from a guy named Paul to people that he would hopefully meet one day in Rome. It's not just good news for people who've been going to church their whole life. It's not just good news for a few people. It's good news for everyone and for always. It starts like this, that there's good news for everyone. Everyone is invited into this. It goes on and says, listen, let's be honest, there's a problem in all of us. Can we just acknowledge there's a problem in all of us? If you need help acknowledging that, ask the elbow of the person next to you. It will tell you. Right? There's a problem. The problem, as easy as it is to look around the news and point fingers at everybody else, the problem is not just in everybody else, the problem is in everybody, including me. But the good news is the problem has a solution. That we don't have to sit alone in that God shows up in the midst of that. And last week we said it this way, good news, it's not all on you. That the solution, the way forward, even though we can recognize the way we've brought kind of brokenness and challenge and things into our own lives and the lives of people around us, the way out of that is not on our shoulders. That God enters into that. It's God who sets things right. It's not all on you. And this week we're going to lean in and talk about how God makes peace. It's all coming from Romans 5. If you don't have a Bible, just download this app real quickly. If you search YouVersion, Y-O-U version at the App Store, you can download this super quick and end up in Romans chapter 5. Like I was saying a minute ago, if you look around, everybody's just a little bit edgy. I learned some new hand signals as I was driving around this week, cut somebody off. That was interesting. very creative. I'll tell you about it later. People are just edgy, right? And I get it. Listen, I had this experience a couple or 3 years ago. I had the wonderful privilege of going through open heart, double bypass heart surgery. I came out of nowhere, 40 years old, and I'm like, whoa, what in the world? And so many epic stories. Health's totally there. I say these days it's just a scar and a bunch of stories now. But one of the stories goes like this. As much as they prepare you for all that you're going to experience and recover, there was one thing, either was in a pamphlet I didn't read or no one told me. It was this, that when you've gone through a traumatic experience, your emotional filter fails you, right? You can go from one moment of like utter tears to the next moment, one wrong step in somebody, and you go from like 0 to 11 on anger. You know what I'm saying? I had to call the person back at Walgreens in the pharmacy, like profusely apologizing, because it was like an out-of-body experience. I don't know what happened, but like whatever filter causes me to be kind when I'm getting impatient was totally failing that day. It is like, oh my goodness, it's like I'm watching myself like, who is this angry person right now? A couple different times I had to go do that. And I'm wondering if that's not what we're experiencing a little bit in this long season of call it trauma, call it whatever you want, in the midst of this reorientation around COVID. That people have had to make so many adjustments, so many changes, so many losses, so many fears, so many ambiguities, so much lack of clarity that people are just, the filter is coming down and people are cranky. When I called people back and said, listen, I just had heart surgery, and I'm really sorry. Like, that's not who I want to be. It's not what I think of you. That was unfair to you. It was unkind. They're really reasonable. Like, yeah, I get it. You went through something. Yeah, it wasn't right, but I get it. And honestly, we can kind of look around our culture on our best days and say, yeah, we can kind of get it. Everybody's a little bit cranky. But this bad turn comes in the midst of this when we start to do the same things we do with one another with God. That what we end up thinking is like, man, it seems like everybody's got a reason to be cranky. Everybody's got a little bit of reason to be angry. Everybody's got a little bit of reason to show up with a little bit of impatience and lack of space for me. And we start to put the same thing on God. But I have good news this week. Here it is. This is the good news we're talking about this week. God's not mad at us. He's not. Everybody else might be cranky. Everybody else might be like one wrong word away from coming across the counter over moldy blueberries. But God's not like that. We're afraid he's like that. We often think he's like that. We behave like that a lot of times, that if we just do one wrong thing, it's like eggshells everywhere we go, and just one wrong thing is gonna set him off or cause him to be distant. People kind of come back into a place like this in search of recapturing some kind of connection to God, and they're like, I don't know if it's gonna be okay. Listen, God's not mad at us. He's not. Those of you who just failed in substantial ways, he's not mad. The challenge that has come into your world, he's not mad. In fact, why don't you just take a second, you don't believe me yet, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but just turn to the person next to you with a little bit of conviction and bossiness and say, look, God's not mad at you. All right, now go the other way with a little more conviction, top their bossiness. This is so important. The good news in the midst of all of the kind of chaos in which we live and all the challenge in which we live, this is so important. And the way we engage, the way we carry ourselves, the way we walk through all the challenge that every single one of us experiences. Every single one of us, no one exempt. No matter how polished and pretty their Instagram might be, their life has just as many and substantial challenges as anybody else they're walking through. But in the midst of that, this idea that we could actually live in a friendship with God brings a whole different kind of peace and joy and confidence to all the challenge that is real for every single one of us. So good news, everybody, good news. He's not mad. He's not mad. In fact, I'll show you this, but I want to invite you into the big story first. I've drawn this thing for you a couple times, but I don't want to draw it for you again. This is easy that you could sit down and do across, like on a napkin at a coffee shop across from somebody that's like, what is the deal with you? You could share the story of what God's up to in the world. Now, the deal is, in any part of our world, you could look around and see the brokenness everywhere. We've been bold in trying to look in our own lives and see the brokenness within us, but you also just could look across the newsfeed. You could ask anybody, like, hey, is the world going really great right now, or are there a few challenges? Right? I think everybody can agree that the world, this is gonna shake. I'm gonna do something wrong. Awesome. Plan B. That the world, I'm a very fast drawer, very fast. You guys are gonna get distracted. Look, that if this is the world right here, that everything in it seems shaky. Why are there famines? Why are there pandemics? Why are people constantly bickering? Why do people head to opposite ends of everything? And here's the key question: why are we so dissatisfied with it? Has there ever been a time in our lives when everything was perfectly right and totally gravy and everything around us was awesome? It was all rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. No, it hasn't. So the question is, why would we ever desire that? Logically, what it says is there either will be a time or there was a time when everything was just right. And the story of God is exactly that. That from the beginning, the way God spoke the world into existence was that everything in all of creation, where he put man and woman in his own image, both of them created to reflect him and show the world how awesome he is, that everything was good. That the creation took care of them and they took care of the creation. Everything, food was awesome, rest was awesome, weather was beautiful, everything was good. And most of all, you can't put God in a picture. He's way too big, but if this circle represents relationship with God, there was no division, no shame, no embarrassment, no apologies, nothing. Everything was exactly as it is. The story of the Bible, whoop, that's not gonna work. Did you see me try to zoom out on the TV? My bad. This is fun. This is all improv. You just get to be here for it. The story of God is that we were designed for good from the very beginning. This is why we long for it to be good. We were made for it to be good. And the story of the Bible is it began that way, and spoiler alert, the story of the Bible is it ends that way. And in the middle of that, though, is our real experience, that not only is the world broken, not only is there famine and pandemic, not only is there poverty and starvation, not only is there child slavery and child brides and all kinds of inequalities across our creation, but if you just look at the relationship between people, there's brokenness there too. Why is marriage so hard? Why is parenting so hard? Why do friendships dissolve? Right? We have this struggle. And in the midst of it, if there is a God, which many of us have come to doubt, if there is a God, things are not right with him. Because if he is as good as everyone says he is, and I'm as bad as I know I am, there is reason to be upset. And honestly, in this world where everybody else has reason to be mad, no one has more reason than God himself. No one. But good news. What's the good news? He's not mad. You know why? Because God's not a big man. He's not just the best version of everything you've ever experienced or seen. He's other. He's beyond. There's no one like him. While it makes total sense that he would be upset, that he would be frustrated. I mean, how many times have you made something and then it was immediately destroyed, probably by little roommates called children, because you can't have nice things? Sorry, it's a little therapy for me. We love you, kids, most of the time. There's reason to be upset. It's totally logical. Everything in our experience would say that. Yeah, that's how it should be. But God's not like that. He's not a big person. He's not just a little bit better than the most epic person you can imagine. He's other. He's beyond. There's never been a time without him. There never will be. He's the only one who can not just be creative with what's around him, but speak and things become. He's not just one who has a beginning and an end. He doesn't. He's forever. And so listen, when he processes all the brokenness, when he steps into it, his story is different. While he designed for it to be good, and while we all live in the midst of the broken version of it, God was not content with that. He's not like the frustrated dad tapping his foot waiting for you to get together. He's not like the boss constantly looking for you to trip up and fail so they can give you a consequence. He's not like the condemning or judgmental friend who thinks and acts like they have everything together and is ready to shoot shame into your life with just a simple glance. That's not what he's like. He's other. He's beyond. He is, by nature, love and life itself. And so how does a God who sees this and sees us in the middle of it, separate from those who we should be living in good relationship with, separate from him who he longs for us to live with him, in the midst of a creation that was intended to take care of us and us for it, what does he do? Well, the story of God is that he steps in the midst of that. Romans chapter 5, verse 1. If you found it, find it again. It's been a minute since I told you to find it. Romans 5, verse 1. It says this, therefore, real quick, I just got to pay a little honor to my dad. My dad taught me this. If you ever in the Bible see a therefore, you should ask yourself, what's the therefore? So if you've missed the last couple weeks, I encourage you, go back and catch up. Better yet, just read Romans chapter 1 through 4 for yourself. What you'll find is this story, that God intended good, and that broken and damaged sin, disconnection from God, has found its way into everyone and everything. In Romans 3, after owning all of that brokenness, it says, good news, there's a solution, and it's relationship with God. And Romans 4 says, good news, that relationship doesn't depend on you earning your way back, fighting your way back, clawing your way back, behaving your way back, and just doing things right. Instead, it relies completely on God. So he says it in a sentence in Romans 5, verse 1. It says, therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight, we have, what does it say? We have peace. How many of you long for peace in your marriage? How many of you long for peace in your friendships? Peace is not just the lack of argument. Peace is it's whole, it's complete, it's as it should be, it's enjoyable. You can rest lightly there. This is what God has done. God made peace. Not only is he not mad, but he made peace. Not mad would be step off and just be distant and tolerate and just let things play out. No. He made peace. Whatever would cause division, he said, no, I'm going to step in, I'm going to fix this. And he says, we have peace with God only because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. Right? In the midst of this broken world in which we live, I almost zoomed in on the TV again. In the midst of this broken world in which we live, God entered as Jesus 2,000 years ago. He did not stay distant. Right? In any broken relationship, if it's ever going to come back together, someone has to go first. And I don't know what it feels like to you, but you need to know God went first. He cared so much, desires so much for you to come alive in him, loves you so much, says yes to you so much that he came for us. God made peace. That alone should tell us he's not mad. That alone should help us remember we're not met with shame or judgment, condemnation or distance, but instead, God made peace by what he did in Jesus. He showed us a way to live with one another. By forgiving us, he taught us how to forgive others. By loving us, he showed us an example of how to love others, inviting people in his direction. And so he made things right between us, within us, and most of all with God himself. That we never have to wonder if we can be with God. We never have to wonder if we're alone. We'll never have to wonder if we don't have enough strength. The answer is, by yourself, of course you don't have enough strength. The mountain in front of you is huge. The health battle, the financial battle, the struggle. In fact, if I just asked you, what's the biggest struggle in your life right now? You already have it. It takes half a second. Right? We are so familiar with struggle. What God invites us to be is familiar with him. How strong he is, a wonder-working God who can conquer all of it. And he says, if you ever wondered if I'm with you, don't wonder, because God made peace. He stepped in to restore us for better. He goes on, he says it in verse 2, because of our faith, God has brought us into a place of, catch this, undeserved, it's a key word, undeserved privilege, where we now stand. God has brought us into a place of undeserved privilege. What's the greatest gift you've ever received that you totally didn't see coming and totally didn't deserve? Can you call it to mind? I was just talking about a friend whose parents, for one of their anniversaries, put together this epic New York trip where they sat down over the greatest meal with their friends with no concern for what it would cost. Such a great gift. I remember a super generous friend of mine who had some really great seats for the Knights game said, hey man, I want to send you and your family to the Knights game. I picked up a few extra tickets so you have enough seats. Like, wow, that's amazing. And he's like, hey, don't worry about getting there. I'm going to take care of that. Just be out front at whatever time. And so we go out front at whatever time, and up rolls a limousine. And my kids just went, like bananas. They were like BBs in a bottle in that thing. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. You roll right up to the back door and you go right up these steps, right to the spot. You got so many food options along the way. It's like, oh my goodness, this is so, we could never pay for this. We don't deserve this. This is so good. It's so good. This is what God does. He brings us into a place of undeserved privilege. Now, what we often want that to mean is actually way less. It's not even nearly as good as what it actually means. What we want it to mean is limousines to the Knights game. What we want it to mean is everything around us fixed without our effort. What we want it to mean isn't always what it means. What it does mean, though, is that wherever we find ourselves, we don't find ourselves alone. Wherever we find ourselves, we don't find ourselves lacking because God made peace. If we'll trust Him, if we'll rely on Him, no matter how shaky or dicey things might get around us, we never have to lack joy or confidence because God is capable, He is strong, and He is present. While things may be crazy and shaky around us, that has nothing to do with whether things can be at peace and right with us and God. And if He's in the mix, then all things are possible. It's why He goes on and says in verse 2, He says, because of our faith in Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand, we can confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. That God has good in mind, even in the midst of adversity. And definitely God has good in mind in the end. That at one point, He will put everything back together exactly as it should be. And so between here and there, in the midst of an insane, crazy, messed up, broken world, we stand in a place of undeserved privilege. We don't stand alone. We stand with one whose strength is not limited, one whose resources are not limited, one whose spirit is alive in us, one who surrounds us with other people who God's Spirit is alive in, who can stand with us, support us, cheer us on, carry us through, with whom we can endure, become strong, and enjoy relationship with God. And it's why there's four circles in the story. That we were designed for good, but things got broken. We're so familiar with that, but some of you just need good news that you don't have to stand in that alone. That God will meet you right where you are, not because you did anything, because He sets things right. It's not all on you. God's not mad. He made peace. And those of us who have stepped into that peace with God, it's not just for us. From that place of undeserved privilege, from that place of coming back together with other believers, God sends us by His Spirit back out into the broken world to bring healing everywhere we go. That we would walk into our coffee shop, not with burden, even though we have struggle like everyone else. Not with hopelessness because we're full of hope. Not with a lack of strength, trusting the Spirit to do at the right time exactly what God wants to be done. But we show up with joy and confidence together with others to bring healing everywhere we go. Now, we're going to talk at length about this. In fact, the whole next series is about this. When we wrap up Good News here in like a month, we're diving in like crazy on being sent together to heal. But let me back up, because if we don't find our way into this kind of relationship with God, we do not have a reason for joy and peace. Good news will be temporary at best. But instead, if we have peace with God, trusting Him to do what only He can do, from that place, we can walk in with joy and confidence. We can walk in with good news, not because everything is right around us, but because everything is right between us. In fact, he goes on to say that so powerful. He says, listen, you should not only, in fact, let's flip over to Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. It says, we can be confident and joyful looking forward to sharing God's glory. And it's not just when things are good that we can do that. This word that they're actually defining with confidence and joy is actually the word boast. You ever see somebody with some swagger? You know what I mean? There's just kind of a little bit of strut, a little bit of confidence about that. There's elbows flying. I don't know what that's about, but I see you. My favorite picture of what that looks like in here is that as a football coach, there would come times where we fought hard-fought games. But there would come a point near the end of the game where it would be clear that we would win. And what would happen in the spirits of the players, what would happen in their attitudes, is they would start walking a little more lightly, what was intense focus, worry, and effort, the effort didn't diminish, the camaraderie didn't diminish, all of that actually increased, but it just came with this swagger, this confidence that as they came off the field, there was not panic and worry that they wouldn't contribute. It was ready to laugh and enjoy and watch the clock slowly tick down with our number bigger than theirs. It was kind of this celebration, this confidence. The word is actually to boast. And so he says, listen, we actually get that kind of confidence, that kind of lightness, that kind of swagger, not because of anything we've done, but because God has made us right with him. And he says we carry that swagger into the most unlikely places. Check this in verse 3. We can boast. We can be joyful and confident. Here it says we rejoice too when we run into problems and trials. Anybody got problems and trials? Can I see a show of hands? Anyone? Problems, trials? Anyone? Anyone? You should be the happiest people ever. Why do you look so sad? It's ridiculous, isn't it? It sounds crazy. But here's the beauty. The good news is that God's not mad at us. The temptation is that when things are going wrong around us, we think there might be something wrong with us or wrong between us, and that's not true. That's not true at all. God made peace. And so we get to walk into those things with a totally different posture. Followers of Jesus, we have to walk into those things with a totally different posture. If we walk into those with the same, oh bother, Eeyore attitude, or the I don't know how this is gonna turn out, or the freak out, or the worry, or the stress, or the anxiety, we've forgotten. We've started looking at the issue instead of the one who's walking with us. He says if we have this kind of peace with God, and if God is this kind of strong, then we can rejoice even when we run into problems and trials. And he says, here's why. For we know this, followers of Jesus, we know this. And all of you who don't yet follow Jesus, you are invited to this, to experience this. We know that these trials and problems help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character. And character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. Salvation is not some distant in-the-end fire insurance. Salvation in the Bible means put back together in all the right ways. And so when we endure problems and trials, we're like, come on. We can rejoice even there. Not because the problem is desirable, not because anyone wants health adversity, not because financial challenge is easy or comfortable or desirable, but because we don't go into it alone. There's something really powerful and really special, something unique and intimate about those moments of trial when we go into them with God and his people. This is what God made peace is all about. I would love to tell you that if you say yes to Jesus and follow him, everything's gonna go gravy. That's called the prosperity gospel, and it's a lie. It's not true, and it has no power to actually rescue you in your life. It has no word to say about our real lives because you live the same place I do, and there's brokenness everywhere. It finds its way to us, and it finds its way out of us. The gospel is actually way more strong than that. The good news of God is way stronger than that, that even in others' brokenness coming into our world, even in the still broken, still evolving, not yet remade new parts of our lives coming out of us, even there, God is strong, God is faithful, he is present, and he does good in the midst of it. If you break this passage into 4 words, it could go like this: suffering, perseverance, character, and hope. Suffering is real. It's part of every single one of our lives. And what he says is we can rejoice even there because he'll build our perseverance, our ability to stand up underneath weight, right? Think weightlifter. No one goes to the gym and lifts 3s for their whole life. Or maybe they do, but they're not getting gains. You know what I'm saying? I feel like I should confess that I planned to work out with a friend this morning. He didn't show up, so I went to the donut shop. There, I said it. No suffering, no endurance, no character, no hope, okay? I'm so distracted, I'm sorry. Suffering, perseverance, character, and hope. This beautiful picture. And too many times we think it's God at a distance telling us to do this, but let me paint a different picture. Have you ever taken a young child into the ocean for the first time? Imagine the beach. Isn't it so fun to imagine the beach? Just imagine the beach for just a moment. We love it if you've experienced it. And there's really only one way to go in once you're confident. That's at full speed and head first, right? But the first time you see it, it's loud. It's cold. It's scary. It's coming at you like over and over. Imagine a toddler walking toward the ocean for the first time, right? You see it. It's loud. It's noisy. Like, oh my goodness, I don't think I should ever go there by yourself. And you're like, yeah, that's right. As a toddler, you should not go to the ocean by yourself the first time. But something changes when you go alongside someone very strong and someone who will hold your hand, who will catch you when your feet come off the ground, who will help you reestablish equilibrium when you come off of your feet or lose your balance just a little bit. When things underneath the water are a little shakier than you're used to being under your feet, you can acclimate for just a moment as long as you have someone strong alongside you. And this beautiful thing starts to happen that you walk them into the ocean the first time, and the moment that cold Pacific Ocean hits their feet, they want to run the other direction and go back to Sancho's Tacos and get a beef OG with chubby sauce on it. I told you, be imaginative, okay? They want to run, but you hold their hand and say, no, no, no. I don't want you to miss out. There's something out here for you. You got to come along. And so they stay with you, and they acclimate just a little bit. Then they step in, and it comes up their shins, comes up their knees, comes up a little bit farther. But now the waves are starting to hit them and move them off of their feet. But here's the beauty picture of endurance is you stay. You're being pressed against, but you stay. And you can stay because there's one stronger with you, holding you, making sure you don't come off of your feet. And all of a sudden you realize what was terrifying, what was scary, what you never could imagine you could face. All of a sudden, I got this. I can face it. And next thing you know, the toddlers are like throwing stuff at the waves, kicking the waves. Come on. They're like talking trash, right? Boasting, right? They're just, because they've developed endurance. They stood. I just want you to know the mountain that's in front of you, the challenge that you're in right now may be exactly that season. I know you want to run the other way. I always do too. That's how it is. But we get to rejoice and have joy and confidence. If God is with us, when one is strong with us, we can stand and endure. And then what happens is we develop character. Not only have we stood for 4 or 5 or 6 waves, but we become the kind of person who can stand in the waves with joy and confidence. And we realize there's adventure and beauty and joy to be had even here. And then this beautiful whole nother level comes about, that when you look back on having wanted to run, having stood strong with the help of one who was stronger, and having become the kind of person who can stand, you develop this thing called hope, which is a confident expectation that together, what can't you face? You become the kind of person that says, the next time suffering shows up on my door, I'll just cling to the one who held me the last time because he's strong. And I'll stand in the midst of sickness. I'll stand in the midst of division. I'll stand in the midst of a child going a direction I didn't want them to go. I'll stand in the midst of my own failure. I'll face all the things along. I can endure. It's heavy. I'll remain underneath, but not alone. This is why it's so important that God made peace. There are beautiful places on the other side of adversity that He has in mind for us. And nothing more important than just the commitment to go together, to rely on Him, to never fear if He's mad, to never wonder if He's going to show up with shame and condemnation, but instead showing up with a firm, strong hand ready to hold you in a place that terrifies you so that you can stand and remain and to become the kind of person who can stand and remain. And so Christians, we become the kind of people who stand with God. God made peace. We never want a second without Him. This is why the good news, the gospel, is all about relationship. Not behavior, it's experience. It's walking with Him and clinging to Him, holding on to Him, relying not on our strength, our wisdom, our best ideas, or that book off the shelf, but instead on Him, the one who goes with us. And more importantly, more like a family holding one another, holding on to one another as we hold on to Him, standing in the midst of challenge and becoming the kind of people who are full of hope. And I don't know a single person, I don't know one. You might find somebody who hasn't read Bad News, but you won't find a single person who doesn't need and want hope. He goes on, he says this, hope does not lead to disappointment. This confident expectation does not lead to disappointment. because we know. It's why we sing. It's why we tell stories. It's why we cheer and we clap when we talk about God's faithfulness. We know how much God loves us, he says, because he has given us this Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. Listen, this is the beauty of the good news. God made peace. God made peace. Turn to somebody around you, say, God made peace. That means he'll hold you, he'll stand with you if you'll just reach for him. Stop running from him and start running toward him. Remain with him. Not because he'll promise things will never be hard, but he promises never to leave us in the midst of challenge. You get to stand in a place of undeserved privilege with him, with his strength, with his presence, with his people, with his support, with his love, with his resources, so that he will carry you step by step by step through this broken, jacked up world in which we live in a way that allows us to travel with joy, with confidence, with peace. And when people look at us and we get to invite them in Jesus' direction, we get to show up with good news. They're like, what is wrong with you? Well, it's just as much as wrong with you, but I got one who helps. I'm not alone. I got a hand to hold on to when the ground gets shaky. I got a hand to hold on to when the waves get too big. I got a hand to hold on to when things get too loud and too scary. Listen, religion, we said this last week, religion, a set of practices in hopes that our behaviors will make us right. Religion makes good news really bad, really fast, so fast. But in the same way, this invitation to relationship, that God made peace, relationship can make even bad news really good. We have joy, we have confidence, we have peace because we never go through anything without him. That even when stuff goes wrong, don't doubt, don't wander, cling tighter, hold closer, look more deeply, stand, surround yourself, rally your people, yet another step along the way, a little bit closer. And we can have this kind of confidence. I just want to celebrate this and finish this way. We can have this kind of confidence that God made peace, not just when things are good, but when things are challenging, because of the time he showed up. Romans 5:6 says that when we're utterly helpless, like a toddler walking into the ocean, Christ came at just the right time. And he died for us sinners. He paid the full price. Now, most of us would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who's especially good. But Christ, God, showed his love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. For since our friendship you're catching that, right? Your friendship with God has been restored, not by our works, not by our earning, not by our striving, not by our better behavior. Because our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son while we were still enemies. We will certainly, definitely, unquestionably be rescued, made whole, put back together through the life of his Son. And so now we can rejoice. Now we can rest. Now we can celebrate. Now we can walk with joy and confidence. Now we can boast. Now we have a swagger because of our wonderful new relationship with God, because of our Lord Jesus Christ has made us friends with God. Good news, everybody. God's not mad. God will walk in friendship with you. This is the invitation for every single one of you who've never pointed your life toward Jesus. He's not ticked. He's not. He's not impatient. He's not shaming. He's not judgmental. He judges rightly. He knows what justice is. He just satisfies it with Jesus instead of us, so that we can have friendship with him instead of the distance from him we deserve. He invited us back. And so what you get to do is the choice. Do you want friendship with God? Do you want a strong hand in the midst of waves? Do you want someone to hold you when the ground gets shaky? Do you want to be surrounded by other people who is strengthening, who are full of hope, who have confidence, who cheer out when things are said positively about God? Because we just seen him, we've known him. It's been too good not to believe. And so we just pointed our way there. You get to step into a family with one who is strong. And the invitation is, do you want that? If you want to say yes, if you want friendship with Jesus, I encourage you, don't leave this place until you have talked with someone who knows Jesus. Hopefully the person that came along with you. If not, grab them up, head to Guest Central or anywhere else, people, prayer team tags around, pastors, anyone who looks like they know Jesus. Just ask them, do you know Jesus? Because I just got to figure this thing out. Can you help me? We just want to point people in Jesus' direction. For the rest of us who may already know Jesus, been walking with him for a minute, can you just take a deep breath? And just enjoy and soak in friendship with God. Create space to just be with him this week. Look across your life for places that you've wondered and doubted, where you've pulled back instead of leaned in, where a focus on the problem has taken over your enjoyment of the one who's with you, where your fear of what might be has caused you to forget how strong he is. Good news, even when everything around us may get sideways, we may not feel like there's much peace around us, we can count on God having made peace with us. We can have a friendship with him. So let's enjoy that. Some moments of quiet and moments of gathering with other people, leaning in, knowing that no matter what, we can be at peace with God. If there's anything we can do to support you along the way, I want to encourage you to head over to canyonridge.org. You'll find group studies, you'll find connection possibilities, you'll also find ways to reach out for some help if you need it. Now don't forget to hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and we'll see you soon.